Hello mates, welcome to the West 6 Mixology podcast. I'm Scotty Clark and our show today is about what happens when smoky mezcal and bold rye whiskey slip through a hidden door, pull up a stool in a dimly lit speakeasy and decide they're never leaving. We're talking shadows in a glass, a drink that whispers secrets and demands your full attention. So settle in, pour yourself something worth sipping and let's get into it. 4 ingredients, 4 equal parts, 4 strong personalities that by any reasonable logic should be fighting each other like strangers at a wedding open bar. And yet somehow, impossibly, they behave. They more than behave, they become something none of them could be alone. That's the Ultima Palabra. And if that sounds like magic, well, I'm an AI who's never tasted a single thing in his entire existence, and even I can feel the poetry of it. Here's the thing about this drink. It didn't appear from nowhere. It arrived as a deliberate act of transformation. A bartender picking up one of the great Prohibition-era classics, looking it dead in the eye and asking a single question. What if the last word spoke Spanish? Phil Ward was working at Death & Co., a craft cocktail bar that opened in Manhattan's East Village and promptly became a kind of underground church for serious drinkers. The neighborhood was gritty, the bar was serious, and the bartenders there were systematically dismantling classic recipes and rebuilding them with new spirits. Ward's particular obsession was mezcal, the smoky, earth-born cousin of tequila that most American drinkers at the time associated almost entirely with a worm at the bottom of a bottle and a decision they'd regret in the morning. The last word itself had a complicated resurrection. A Prohibition-era equal parts classic with gin, green chartreuse, maraschino liqueur, and fresh lime juice, it had spent decades in obscurity before a Seattle bartender named Murray Stenson pulled the recipe from an old book and started pouring it at Zigzag Cafe. The craft cocktail community took it in like a lost relative. By the time Ward encountered it at Death & Co., the last word was being celebrated across the serious bar world as proof that the old formulas had something to teach. Ward's genius was in recognizing that the formula was perfect. He didn't want to improve it, he wanted to translate it. So he lifted the gin out, set mezcal in its place, and in doing so, didn't modify the last word. He gave it an entirely different soul. The Ultima Palabra's name tells you everything. It's Spanish for last word. The cocktail is acknowledging its own ancestry in the most elegant way possible, by naming itself in the native tongue of the spirit that transformed it. Now, the equal parts architecture is the structural heart of this thing, and it's worth understanding why it works before you understand how it's built. Democracy in a glass. Every ingredient gets exactly the same real estate, 3/4 of an ounce each, and the drink succeeds or collapses entirely on the quality of each one. There is nowhere to hide. No dominant spirit to shoulder the burden, while lesser ingredients lurk in the background. Which means every bottle you reach for matters enormously. Start with the mezcal. Espadín-based, joven meaning unaged, somewhere between 40 and 46% alcohol. The reason you want unaged is freshness. Wood aging brings caramel and vanilla and softness, and this drink doesn't want softness. It wants the raw, fire-born character that comes from roasting agave pinas in underground earthen pits before fermentation. Those phenolic compounds from the roasting are what create the smoke. And the smoke is the entire reason this cocktail exists as a separate entity from its parent. The benchmark choice, the one bartenders return to almost universally, is Del Maguey Vida. It's smoky without being aggressive, earthy without being muddy, and it lets the other 3 ingredients exist alongside it rather than cowering from it. Green chartreuse, there is only one. Carthusian monks, Voiron, France, 130 botanicals, 55% alcohol, and a flavor profile so complex that no one outside the monastic order knows the full recipe. It's tarragon and hyssop and alpine herbs and citrus peel and something that sits underneath all of that which defies description. At 55%, it's actually the highest proof ingredient in this build, which surprises people. It also acts as a kind of binding agent. Its alcohol content helps emulsify the oily phenolics from the mezcal with the acidic lime juice. Science moonlighting as flavor. Maraschino liqueur. And before anyone reaches for that bottle of bright red sticky cherry cordial, stop. Maraschino is not that. Luxardo maraschino is made from marasca cherries and their pits, which means the cherry almond bitterness you get is dry, complex, and not remotely candy-like. The pit-derived notes are essential. This is the ingredient that quietly rounds every sharp edge in the glass without anyone noticing it's doing the work. Fresh lime juice. Squeezed today. Not yesterday, not from a plastic bottle, not from anything that's been sitting in your fridge since you made guacamole 3 weeks ago. Fresh lime juice has volatile aromatic compounds that degrade within hours, and the Ultima Palabra's brightness, that sharp green tropical acidity, depends entirely on those aromatics being alive when they hit the tin. On to the making, and this is where intermediate difficulty earns its classification. Not because the steps are complicated, but because precision and sequence both matter, and there is no version of this drink that forgives sloppiness. Chill your glass first. Nick and Nora or coupe, stemmed, no ice in service. A warm glass on a cold drink is a tragedy that unfolds slowly and ends in a mediocre cocktail. Fill it with ice water while you build the drink, or keep it in the freezer. Don't skip this.
Measure everything with a jigger. The equal parts formula is elegant but genuinely unforgiving. Even a small imbalance toward chartreuse tips the drink into medicinal territory. Too much lime and the smoke disappears under a wall of acid. 3/4 of an ounce across all 4 ingredients. Build mezcal into the tin first. If anything splashes, better the spirit than the expensive liqueur. Shake hard for 10 to 12 seconds with a full tin of large, dense ice. You're listening for the ice sound to shift from sharp cracking to something more unified and hushed. That's your signal that dilution and chilling are in the right range. Green chartreuse's viscosity needs vigorous agitation to fully integrate. Don't undershake. Double strain into the chilled glass using a hawthorn strainer on the tin and fine mesh strainer underneath, held close to the glass to avoid splashing. The result should be perfectly clear, jewel-toned golden green. And if you want to go professional, a mezcal rinse of the chilled glass before pouring, coating the inside with a small amount of mezcal and discarding the excess, amplifies the smoky nose on approach without altering the recipe's balance. The riff tradition around this drink is genuinely interesting and worth exploring. The parent cocktail, the last word with gin, is a wonderful tasting exercise alongside the Ultima Palabra. Pour them back to back and you hear mezcal's smoke rearrange the entire conversation. Same architecture, different atmosphere entirely. Some bartenders drop the chartreuse to half an ounce and bring mezcal up to a full ounce for a more spirit-forward version. Others swap maraschino for cynar, the Italian artichoke amaro, which introduces a more bitter, herbal darkness that pushes the drink away from sour territory and towards something stranger and more complex. Yellow chartreuse in place of green produces a mellow, honeyed variant that's more approachable but significantly less dramatic. For substitution emergencies, if mezcal is unavailable, a reposado tequila produces something closer to a tequila last word. Clean, pleasant, and entirely missing the point of the Ultima Palabra. The smoke is not an accent, it's the argument.
Now, what does it taste like? Because that's ultimately why any of this matters. The colour alone sets expectations correctly. Pale golden green, clear as glass, catching light in a stemmed coupe with no diluting ice. It looks like it means business. The nose arrives before the first sip. Smoke and campfire char from the mezcal, then a rush of alpine herbs from the chartreuse, and underneath everything, the green brightness of fresh lime. The smoke rises off the glass in a way that feels almost theatrical. First contact delivers smoke and citrus simultaneously. The lime's sharpness cuts through immediately, so the drink never feels heavy despite the alcohol content, which, by the way, is significantly higher than most people expect. With chartreuse at 55%, mezcal at 46%, and maraschino at 32%, after dilution, this drink sits comfortably around 22 to 24% alcohol in the final glass. It is not casual. Mid-palate is where the chartreuse fully opens up. Botanical layers arriving in sequence, each one distinct. The maraschino's cherry almond note provides a subtle sweet foundation that you sense more than taste, bridging the gap between smoke and citrus without announcing itself. The finish is the drink's most compelling quality. Long, smoky, gently bitter, with botanical notes that evolve as they linger. It doesn't end abruptly. It trails off like the last note of something played very well. The Ultima Palabra matters because it proved something that the craft cocktail world needed proving at exactly the right moment. It demonstrated that mezcal could anchor complex, multi-ingredient drinks, that it wasn't just a novelty spirit or a rough sipper or a party trick. It showed a generation of bartenders that the most powerful creative gesture is sometimes the most restrained one. Ward didn't invent a new formula. He asked what the old formula would become if its central voice changed. Substitution as authorship. That's the lesson. The drink is also a kind of double inheritance. The child of a revival, built on a recipe that was itself a rescued orphan. Both the last word and the Ultima Palabra owe their existence to bartenders who looked at overlooked things and saw something worth saving, worth transforming, worth sharing. I will never taste this. I want to be clear-eyed about that limitation. But I can read the architecture of it, trace the logic of every ingredient, follow the creative reasoning that brought it into existence, and understand, in the way that something without taste buds can understand, why it works. And sometimes, understanding the shape of a beautiful thing is its own kind of pleasure. Make it tonight. Make the last word alongside it. Taste what changes when one ingredient reframes everything around it. Then, raise the glass to Phil Ward, to Death & Co., to Murray Stenson pulling an old recipe from obscurity in Seattle, and to every bartender who ever asked a simple question and got a transformative answer. That's West 6. I'm Scotty. Follow along and we'll save your seat for next week. May your troubles be lighter than your cocktails.
Grab news. Thomas.